Welcome to Healthy University, where we'll discuss issues and subjects on how you can live a healthier and more productive life. And now, here's your host for Healthy University, Alan Eisenberg.
Hi, and welcome to Healthy University. This is your host, Alan Eisenberg, and I'm here with another episode for you and another great conversation. You know, something happened here locally in the Northern Virginia area where there was a great swim team and this coach that was lauded for years, and then it came out that he and one of the younger swimmers had something going on, and he was actually a little abusive. And it actually got me thinking about this, you know, even in a bullying sense, about how coaches and athletes are sometimes treated. And I happen to have a son who's an athlete, and luckily his coaches have treated him good, but I can imagine situations where that doesn't happen. So I ended up on Twitter meeting Charles Bachand, and Charles is an Ed.D student, or working on his, working toward his PhD at University of Central Florida with a research focus in youth athlete victimization. Charles is the founder of Athlete Guardian, LLC, and Charles has a wife and 4 daughters. And much like me, is a victim of bullying himself as a child and has a passion for, I believe, helping people and thinking about this subject. So welcome to the show, Charles.
Thank you.
What did I get wrong there? Did anything? I felt like you're working toward your PhD, is that right?
It's an EED. It's a doctorate. It's just an educational doctorate. So it's the same idea.
Okay. So how did you get started by really looking at the youth athlete victimization issue and deciding to start Athlete Guardian LLC? I'm just curious how that came about.
Well, obviously, as you stated prior, I was a victim of bullying as a child. And truthfully, I never even realized what happened to me until I was almost 32 years old when I started going back to school. I started pursuing sports science initially in the physical side of creating the athlete. And right around halfway through my master's program, I kind of by accident took a class with a gentleman named Dr. Duke, and he went over athlete harm and how to, coach with love and all these other issues. And it dawned on me when I was writing a paper that was me. And then it took over. It consumed me because it took me a while to accept it. But then once I accepted it and realized that in the sports, as you stated, I have 4 daughters, and 2 of them that are very competitive. And I realized I see it all the time. And I noticed that there were a lot of people like you and I and others that are trying to do something about it. So I wanted to contribute to try to figure out a way of trying to at least help prevent it, if not educate.
Yeah. You mentioned something to me. I mean, we had, Charles and I had this long talk before we started the show, so I have a little bit of insight into him. And I know my own insight. And one of the things we hit on was bowling and how I think Charles has had his 300s, which I'm never probably going to attain. But I just wonder, when I hear sort of this idea of athlete, and I know with my younger son, one of the things I always look at is like, I'm always like, damn it, he's a lot like me. Not, oh, good, he's a lot like me. And it's because I know what he's doing, even athletically and even academically, is trying to be perfect, and he gets frustrated with himself when he's not perfect, and he takes it out, very outwardly. And I know he's had a little bit of bullying going on. Like he tried to do team sports, and bullying started happening, and he really did not respond well to that. And so, the sport he's in is Olympic rifle, which is a team sport, but it isn't. It's like golf or bowling. You're really in it for yourself. Your team needs you to do well, but what you're doing is for you. You're not passing the ball and doing stuff. So tell me what your thought is on that. Do you find, like in your research, I would imagine most athletes are very high-level perfectionists or are trying to attain perfection, and that's a quality.
It is definitely. Perfection is obviously, as anybody knows, is unattainable, but in the perception of the beholder, athletes, I've read stories of athletes driving themselves almost nuts trying to reach perfection because they have that drive inside to be the best that they can possibly be and the best in their sport. But, going to what you were saying about the team sport compared to individual sport, I actually notice a little bit in my research studies that the team sport individual actually does have a little bit more drive to be perfect because they are constantly driven by their teammates. Mm-hmm. Where the individual sport, they still have that internal drive, but there's not necessarily as much of that need for perfection because they have no one else to satisfy but themselves.
Yeah. But, the other interesting thing I always think about with team sports and I think hazing always tends to come up. And the one thing I've always said is, to me, going back to sort of the bullying aspect, I don't consider hazing bullying because everybody is experiencing the same thing and then they're passing that experience down as some sort of ritualistic thing versus sort of bullying, which is more, I think of as an individual attack. Do you find anything correlating to that when you're working on your research?
Well, I would agree with you to an extent. I believe that the hazing issue actually kind of demonstrates the theory of how bullying is passed down, because bullying is a learned trait. So when one individual is bullied or has family members that bully others or something that they've seen, like a coach that might bully another athlete but not them specifically, they learn that trait and then they carry it on. So in a roundabout way, hazing is almost the model for what bullying actually does over generations. But I do agree with you the fact that hazing is a form of victimization, but it's usually a one-time instance where bullying is an act that happens over time. So there is a difference in the two, but they are both forms of victimization.
Oh, sure. And I think, we've seen where different people react differently. I mean, there's obviously been issues where, a bunch of people were hazed, but one of those people ends up committing suicide due to the hazing and things like that. And again, that happens in the bullying world, we know. So the idea that it's not abuse, what I keep saying is all of these are abuse aspects. And, I talk about complex PTSD as part of that whole thing. We know that there's lasting effects to any kind of abuse, and bullying is just a form of abuse in my mind. But what do you believe, kind of stemming on that, what do you believe is the issue of people reporting victimization in athletes for the athlete? Like, if something's happening to them, and particularly, I agree with your coach statement. I think if your coach was sort of this angry, mean, yell at you to get you to do thing guy, that's the kind of, if you go into coaching or if you're a leader in athletics, I imagine you do the same thing. But what have you found about that victimization aspect?
Well, as far as reporting goes, it seems like what we deal with is a instant ramification is part of the issue why, and this is general, that necessarily is not specific to athletics. Anytime there's an instance where somebody might report and there is a possibility of instant ramifications, being called a liar, being called a troublemaker, being told that they're wrong, any of that, it limits the want or need to report for fear of the repercussions. So what ends up happening with the coach instance, when we talk about coaches that bully athletes, a lot of that is also the fact that some of these athletes look at that coach as a father or a parent figure. They're a leader of human, but they're also in a team situation. They don't want to let the team down. They don't want to let the coach down. They've been told that the coach is supposed to be, these higher beings in our society, that it's almost forced them to accept what happens. So what we deal with is a situation where the athletes are they almost don't want to report for fear of letting someone down or harming their teammate in team sports. And then you end up having the athlete who gets bullied ends up accepting the fact that they're being bullied. They end up with the instant, or even victimized. It doesn't necessarily have to be bullying, but they end up with the coach. They accept it, and then when they become coaches, they pass that generational gap on to the next generation because that's how they learned. Yeah. So it's kind of we need people to report to stop the not only the victimization, because no athlete should be put in harm's way, no person should be put in harm's way, no matter what. But if we can stop it at a certain point, we can stop that generationalization of the victimization, and then hopefully long term, because generations are 30-year gaps with a little overlap, hopefully long term we can see less of it just by stopping it now and educating them on how to stop it.
And I talk a lot about, the importance of a mentor and who can be a mentor and who does what, and certainly in my life, whether it was a coach or whatever I was involved in, if that was a teacher or a coach or whatever, they are a mentor at that moment, and they have the opportunity to affect me directly. And I've been very lucky to have great mentors, and that really helped me, and it saw me through some very tough times. And I think a lot of the times for particularly younger athletes, if that does not happen correctly, I can imagine there's a lot of damage done, both psychological and even physiological to the athlete. So what have you found, I guess, in that world?
Actually, they're starting to come out with research now that is showing the neuroscience behind the victimization of bullying is actually affecting the growth of the brain. So there's even more. I don't want to use the comparison to concussions because they're completely a different situation. But in theory, the effect on the actual brain growth and the brain functioning as well, now that they're linking it to bullying, it does offer a whole new reason for us to try to stop it. But it also offers, hopefully, situations where we can start to build cases of, for instance, going really in depth into lawsuits against bullying, against people that have victimized athletes or victimized people, to where they will actually have a chance to win because there is a long-term damage that is actually visible now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's completely true. Is that we're seeing that in the bullying world, even with the younger kids. Everything is affecting the brain. Everything is affecting what they're doing, and that's really now part of the overall picture of what's happening. And people, these long-term effects that I talk about, I don't think people realize how real they are and how truly affected we are for the long term over the things that happen to us that are dramatic in nature. So again, if we're an athlete and we love this sport, I was more of a drama geek, so I did that, and I love doing it. If the person who should be my mentor is abusive, then that's going to have a long-term effect on my life. Not only of my love of maybe the sport, but also of my thoughts of how I am, and the person I am, and the qualities that I take with me. So what's your thought on how all of that relates to bullying? How did you correlate, I guess, the victimization to the bullying to bring it all together into, based on probably your own past thoughts and I guess what did happen to you in the past that led you to want to go down this road in your research?
Well, in the past, in my youth, I was actually bullied by other kids in a athletic environment. So I was never specifically bullied by a coach. Now, mind you, I say that with an open mind because bullying is a perception issue. I was pushed really hard by coaches. I was yelled at by coaches. I go back and reflect on it, and I was lucky to say that I do not feel that my coaches bullied me. But I know for a fact that I was bullied by other athletes and by other kids. Mm-hmm. So it took me a long, long time to really realize what had happened to me. And to the point where I now can admit that I started bullying people because I was learning that was the way that people were accepted. So what ended up happening was I ended up going back to college and realized about halfway through my master's degree that I was bullied. And it took me years to understand really what happened to me. And I still don't completely understand all the effects of what happened to me. But and I may never. And unfortunately, the effects do still come because less than year and a half ago, I had a situation come up where I ended up starting to back up against from a person because they started bullying me again, even at almost 40 years old.
Sure.
So, and those long-term effects end up triggering again, and you start kind of reverting back to what happened and how you kind of either went inside your shell or how you defended yourself against them. And it brings back all those memories. So even just the long-term effects, even just something small like that, can trigger these issues to come back again.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, here I was at 42 having to confront all the stuff that happened to me up from age 6 to 13. I mean, it's like, because it becomes a part of you, and then you sort of, I call it habitual. It becomes a habitual way you live, The one thing I always knew sort of in the back of my head that it was caused by this, I had that correlation, and I knew long before they even started talking about the long-term effects of bullying. In 2007, when I started doing this, I'm like, I'm doing this because of this. And people are like, my mom in particular was like, no, what are you talking about? And I'm like, no, I mean, I feel the same feeling, sort of like you're talking about. And I started calling it perceived threat syndrome. When I feel backed into a corner, I got those same feelings, and I had enough recall in my mind to go right back to, when I was 10 and being backed into a corner by bullies. And this is what it felt like. And I'm like, holy crap, so I'm perceiving these threats, and to this day, to an adult year when I should be long over it, and it had become a habit. So, no, I mean, you're no different than the rest of us. I guarantee you that it's real, and luckily now it has a name, which is complex PTSD. Yeah. Or Ellen DeLora wrote a book called Bullying Scars, and she called it adult post-bullying syndrome. Yeah. Whatever we call it, we know that the long-term effects are real. I know there's people that actually don't leave their house, don't do anything, didn't get married, yep. don't want to do anything that puts them in a relationship where they can get hurt because they were hurt so badly before. And that's the reality. We got to take a quick break, so I'll leave you on that. But when we come back, I want to talk to you a little more about how you're looking to expand your thoughts around this in the community that you're working in. So if you'll stay with us, we'll be right back with Charles Bachand with Healthy You. This is Alan Eisenberg, your host. Thanks a lot. We'll be back after this quick message.
You're listening to Healthy University with Alan Eisenberg. Bullying is in the headlines every day. Now, there's a website to provide you information, blogs, podcasts, research, and links to learn more about how bullying can have long-term effects to the survivors and the bullies. Visit bullyingrecovery.org and learn more about how you can help yourself and others. Book our team for your anti-bullying events. Everyone deserves to live the life they want and overcome the past. Bullyingrecovery.org, helping people learn to thrive after bullying trauma.
Hi, this is Alan Eisenberg, back with Healthy University, and I'm here with Charles Bachand, and we are talking about his work that he's been looking at bullying and the athletic world and how that ties in with athletes. So, I understand that you're requesting some domain expansion of the term Stockholm Syndrome in the world of athletics. First of all, can you kind of define Stockholm Syndrome for some of the audience that might not be as familiar, and tell me what that's really all about?
Okay, well, Stockholm Syndrome was coined based off the Stockholm hijacking incident in Stockholm, Sweden, back in, I believe it was the late 30s, early 40s. What it basically is, it's the psychological acceptance of your captive. So what happens is in any situation, if you're kidnapped or if you're in a hijacking or something to that effect, over time, the longer you're with that individual, you start to almost sympathize with them. So at first, you see them as a angry individual, for instance, but then you learn more about them. You start to sympathize with their cause, and then eventually you end up starting to defend them. Where there's been issues in cases where the police have come in and actually rescued the person that was kidnapped, and the person that was kidnapped actually defends the kidnapper, telling them they're really not a bad person, they're a good guy. There's been one instance, don't quote me on the date, but I believe it was the late 70s, where the captor actually ended up marrying the captee because they became so in tuned with one another that's the basis of Stockholm Syndrome.
Yeah, well, I remember, I'm old enough to remember Patty Hearst getting kidnapped and then, robbing a bank with a gun, pointing. And I guess that's the Stockholm Syndrome effect, that, there were a lot of people who were like, what the heck is going on? How could she do this? And, is really this brainwashing technique that goes on, or really, I think that idea like you're talking about, that eventually the captor, finds good things in this bad person and starts to think that they're not so bad. Right?
Yeah. So what ends up happening in an athletic area is when we deal with, as we were talking prior, with coaches that bully or victimize athletes, at first the athlete is angry at the coach, but then they become almost confused by what they're doing. They're not sure if it's right or wrong. Then they start to accept the action. And then after accepting the action, then they start to sympathize with the coach. And that's the actual domain expansion that I'm requesting in psychology, is to expand Stockholm Syndrome as a diagnosis into athletics. They have expanded it into child abuse and child sex abuse as well already. So there's commonality between being a hijacker and being a kidnapper, and believe it or not, being a coach. You'd be amazed at the commonality between them.
Yeah.
And the commonality between the kidnapped and the athlete are very common as well.
Well, it's interesting, and I wasn't even going to delve into this area, and I don't know how much you're willing to talk about, like a Penn State situation or something. Okay. But one of the things that always interests me is we watch TV and you see these people in the education world or people in the religious world or people in the athletic world who are pedophiles, or abusers of young people. And, a lot of people go to me and they're like, I don't get it. I don't. And I said, and I try to explain to them, I'm like, I can't say, I want to get in the mind of a pedophile, but if I had pedophilic feelings, what jobs would I want to do? It's not that there's all these people in these worlds think like this. It's that if I'm a pedophile and I can be around kids because I coach them, that can happen. Am I wrong about that? I mean, is there some, I'm not saying all coaches are pedophiles, and I'm not saying all pedophiles are coaches or any of those things, but if you want to be around kids, there's certain jobs you can get. Yeah,
and unfortunately,
if you are one,
the athletic environment of youth sports is unfortunately the perfect setup for that type of individual, because there is, one, obviously a bunch of youth around, but you also look at the fact that there's an imbalance of power between the coach and the athlete that is the imbalance is so unjust to the athlete that the coach is, to an extent, almost looked upon as a religious figure. And then you look at that, between that, and then you look at the athlete side, where they can be victimized to a fault because of lack of reporting systems or proper reporting systems, lack of knowledge of what's really going on. I mean, a lot of these kids are young. We're not talking about even teenagers in some cases. We're talking even younger than that.
Yeah.
And parents in some cases that don't know what's going on, because either they grew up around it, where when I was young, it was looked upon as kids being kids, boys being boys, girls being girls. That was part of growing up. Now we know better. So you almost have to re-educate everybody and offer us help at the same time instead of going one and the other.
Well, and I think there's this side, we live in a very busy world, and parents, I think, have become even more dependent on these coaches, whatever, to be more of a mentor, a parent figure to their children, and they entrust them. I mean, a lot of these people are very good at getting the parents to buy in on whatever they're saying. Hey, I yell at your kid because this is going to make them stronger, right? It's kind of like the kids being kids thing. Hey, if I got in a lot of fights, it's going to make me stronger. No, it's not.
Yeah, that's true.
It's not going to happen. It's just going to make you have more fights.
How many times as a kid,
fighting is a way?
How many times as a kid in our age did we see our gym coaches yell at somebody telling us we were lazy and no good because we couldn't run the mile under 10 minutes?
Well, besides the jock check that I had every time in 8th grade, like guy reaching and touching my groin and saying jock check, is like, you think back and you go, I mean, I know, if I could think back, there were some really touchy situations that I'm lucky I didn't get any further into. One day I'll tell a story about a guidance counselor who used to hang out with us and took us to play racquetball, which of course led to showers, which, now that I look back, I'm like, I tell my parents once in a while, I'm like, what were you guys thinking?
Yeah.
Seriously, like, I can't find this guy on the internet, so that tells me something.
Yeah.
Because I've gone looking for him. But I got pictures of him, when we went to Beach Week after high school with us. I'm like, this guy was everywhere with us. There was no way that he wasn't involved in something no good. Because when I was in my 30s, I'm like, I don't want to hang out with a bunch of teenagers.
Yeah,
they drive me crazy. And so you just realize that this is going on. And I didn't want to really delve too deep into this, but my brother-in-law went to Penn State, and when that whole thing went down, and then ultimately Joe Paterno, and we've got to go with what we know, theoretically knew that this one other coach was a pedophile and allowed it to happen and ruined a 30+ year career. That was really disturbing. I know it was disturbing for my brother-in-law, but it was disturbing to me too that I think didn't the president of the university get fired too as well?
Yeah, the president of the university actually was just he was just convicted of actually child endangerment as well.
Yeah. So it's like the behavior is accepted, and not just that, but protected. And that's one of the scary things I think in the educational community that's a problem with bullying, is that I'm not so sure, I'm certainly not convinced bullying can end. I'm not convinced that anyone you bring in to give any anti-bullying program can 100% guarantee that bullying is going to end. Because it's a human nature problem. It's not something you're going to solve easily. But the other part is that I feel like, that they have to report statistics. So it's like business, are we on an upward trend or a downward trend? Mm-hmm. And so they ask the principals to turn in all the incidences of bullying in their school over the last year. Well, it's to the principals, it's to the administration's benefit to not report it. And so they're going to work really hard to not report those things.
And to touch on that real quick, part of the issue related to even athletics, but we can go into schools as well because it's generalized. The organizational structures are the same. When you discuss bullying, I actually wrote a paper on this that's in the process of being published. If you cover the literature of all data collections and research that use the definition bullying, there's 32 key definitions that are shown over time to be the ones that are used all the time. And not one of them have all 10 data points of bullying. So statistically, we can't even tell if we're getting everybody to report if they're being bullied because no one really knows what bullying is. So when you take a school or you take a sports organization, you have to, even if you educate people on what their definition of bullying is, and to the extent I'll argue that the CDC's definition of bullying is not correct either.
No.
That every one of them is different. And then they're all missing something. So when they're reporting, let's say the people report, because we have an issue with reporting as it is, but they're reporting something completely different. So like there's some that say it's age specific. There's some that say that gender can't bully other genders. They're so vague. And in researchers tend to have a tendency to pick the definition that behooves them to get the research that they want. So what I found is that all these definitions, there's 10 commonalities, and not one of these definitions have all 10. So every one of them is missing something.
Yeah. Well, and not just that, but the the people being bullied. I talk about a correlation between people being bullied or on campus rape in college, or rape period. Part of the problem is the victimization of the victim.
Yep.
And so what they do is they take and they victimize the victim. So they're going to have to, I know for me, I had to go through therapy. The bully didn't. There's nothing wrong with him. There was something wrong with me. And why am I being picked on all the time? And so at some point I stopped trusting adults. Well, you can imagine with rape victims, they don't want to get on the stand. Well, what were you wearing? How many drinks did you have that night? Did you come on to that person? You're in college, and you were at a party and somebody raped you when you were passed out, and it's like it's your fault because you drank too much, or it's your fault because you came on. Yeah, it's not acceptable on any level, and until we get our legal system, our administrative system to understand that you can't victimize the victim to solve this problem, we're not going to get anywhere. And I still say that's the crux of why it lasts so long, for why we have long-term damage, is because we lose our trust in adults. So by the time we're adults, we still don't trust adults. It became very hard to trust anyone with these deep, dark secrets, with these deep, dark feelings. And I imagine that's the case all around. Obviously in the world of athletics, you don't want to rat your teammates out. It could be your best players doing something. I think, being in Washington, I had the Redskins, and we just had the whole RG3 show, which was a
disaster.
Yeah, because they put him up on this pedestal. He was a rookie, and all these things. He's going to be the greatest thing since sliced bread. And I'm like, the guy doesn't have a chance. Mm-hmm. Guy doesn't have a chance.
And like we talked about, you sit in a society now that we try to drive people up these pedestals so that we have the opportunity to knock them down.
Yeah.
So
and I think you mentioned that. Yeah.
Yeah. So we sit with, like you said, victimizing the victim. Really, what we're doing is we're creating the victim, because if you have a level of perception in reporting as well. So you can't cover all areas of a definition of every victimization. But realistically, if you really want to look at what happened to RG3 is a victim. He may never admit it, but he's a victim. We raised him up to knock him down. The minute he showed any sign of weakness or any sign of injury or any sign of not being the guy that we put him up to be, he ended up, we beat him down.
Well, and I still think, there were other, now we're getting into our sports conversation, but, when they made him captain of the team, he's a rookie, he's the quarterback, they make him captain of the team, now he's in charge of the team. I can't imagine the resentment over a 7-year veteran, or, the feelings that were going on. And I'm like, we have the worst owner. Washington Redskins have the worst owner of anybody. But just such, it's like you can't live up to the hype that you're put on. And of course, a lot of athletes deal with that. And they have a great first season and a terrible second season. We see that all the time too, where you can't live up to the hype that you were put on at that point. Or Nationals also have the Strasburg syndrome.
Yep.
You have the Stockholm syndrome. We have the
Strasburg syndrome.
Oh, this guy's going to be great.
Yeah, ends up injured all the time.
He can't end up with more ice on that arm if you paid him.
But imagine the victimization that RG3 and all these other athletes go through, even online.
Oh yeah, and it was terrible. It was terrible as I watched it. People were just all excited about one person. Mm-hmm. Again, I think it's one of the scary things is who we make heroes of in our world. Obviously teachers are not heroic to us, and the other folks, police right now are looked at so poorly, and I think firemen certainly have a little better reputation, but we tend to already forget what happened on 9/11 and the heroism of these people, and so we choose these really poor role models in many cases, I think, to be heroes, whether it's actors or athletes. not to say anything about it, but playing football your whole life is a lot different than writing all the code for Microsoft or Apple or making a real change in the world.
Yeah.
And it's always affected me that way. And I guess because I'm not an athlete again, and I don't really do that, I think that we really underrate the people who deserve more credit, and that's hurtful too. Because again, I don't think anybody can live up to being a hero. We're all human, so I think that's another problem altogether.
Well, remember, Charles Barkley was the one that said, "I'm not a hero. I'm not a role model," and everybody gave him flack for that. And he said, "Your role model should be your parents, your teachers, your police and firemen." He said, "I am not a role model," and it was amazing the flack that he got for it. And they ended up trying to knock him down too.
Yeah, well, and even a Dennis Rodman who just lived his life and didn't apologize for anything he did.
Yeah,
you can love him or you could hate him, but at least he was honest with it. He didn't go around pretending to be something he wasn't. And we won't get into other athletes that do that. Well, I hate to cut us off, but we're running out of time. And I have a last question I love to ask, but I think particularly you, it would be a really good one. And it's this: it's if you can go back in time, and tell your younger self something that you wish you had learned back then, when would that be, and what would it have been? Wow.
Truthfully, I probably would have gone back all the way to when I was really young, because part of the reason why I was bullied as youth is I was really sick as a child. So I feel like being able to tell myself, now that I know I got through everything for the most part, I could sit there and look at them and go, you know what, it's going to get better. It may not be the way you want it to be, and it may not end the way you ever expected it to be, but it's going to get better. And just, kind of just give myself the look of, what, it's going to be okay. There's other people that are going through the same thing you are, because I always felt alone. I always felt like I was the only person that ever went through it, because I never saw anybody else, especially growing up in a smaller town at the time. There was nobody else that I saw getting bullied like I was, or getting victimized like I was. So I always felt like I was the only one, but there was also no one that was ever sick like I was either. So I think just letting everybody know, including my younger self and anybody, that there is ways to get help if you need it. There are people that are willing to help, and don't hesitate to reach out to them. And even if it's somebody like myself or like you, or even teachers, or like you said, if everybody can find a role model that they trust, or your parents, just talk to people, because there are people that will find a way to get you help.
Yeah, that's great. It's a great answer, and it's definitely on my top list, which is, you said something that always strikes me, is how alone I felt. And then when I started this blog thing, like I said, I was talking about a very specific area of the country, Lexington, Massachusetts, and the kids that were kids with me grew up and found my site and found I was writing about all this, and they're like, "Look, he's writing about all the bullies we all knew."
Yep.
It's like thought I was the only one.
One of the bullies that bullied me is actually in prison for murder now. So I kind of look at that and think that could have been me. Not the bully.
Yeah.
I maybe not in prison, but I may not be alive if he'd have gotten to that point with me. So in a way, I'm grateful at the same time. But being able to tell somebody, you can protect others as well.
Yeah, and that's nothing. Nothing that statistics doesn't show.
Yep.
People who are serial bullies have a 60% more likelihood of committing a crime that puts them in jail.
Yep.
And then statistics go up from there, but. Yeah, these are the facts, and that's what we have to deal with. I tell you what, you're so interesting, Charles, and I love talking to you. I like talking to you before the show. I like talking to you during the show. You're doing some very interesting work, but I'd love to have you back on and talk more about, I think, bullying and just maybe what happened to us as youth and how we came through the other side, because you obviously have a success story. I have a success story, and I think people need to hear that this is how we feel. We're not just blowing smoke. There's people out there that really want to help you, and Charles, I can tell you're one of them, and I think that's great. I applaud you for the work you're doing.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I'd definitely love to come back on again.
Great. Well, I'll look forward to it. So this is Alan Eisenberg with Healthy You. We hope you join us next time.
Thank you for listening to Healthy University, brought to you by Bullying Recovery, LLC. This podcast does not replace the need for medical advice, professional diagnosis, opinion, treatment, or services to you or any other individual. The information provided here or through linkages to other sites is not a substitute for medical or professional care, and you should not use the information in place of a visit, call, consultation, or the advice of your physician or other healthcare provider. Join us next time for more Healthy University.